Crumbling walls whisper untold stories, and shadows dance with forgotten secrets. Venture into the haunting realm of abandoned places where time stands still and darkness reigns. These eerie locations, once bustling with life, now hold chilling remnants of the past, whispering tales of tragedy, mystery, and the macabre. Prepare to uncover the hidden truths as we embark on a spine-chilling journey into the depths of darkness.
Start things off though with bog body. This is about as unsettling as it sounds. Bog is just such a gross word. Bog. Nothing good could ever come out of a bog. So bog bodies are human remains that were preserved in peat bogs. And peat bogs are these wet, swampy areas with a ton of decomposed plant material. The acidic and oxygen deprived conditions in bogs can actually keep bodies from completely rotting away, so they actually kind of get mummified. Turns out a lot of ancient cultures in Northern Europe used to bury their dead this way in order to preserve them. Archaeologists in Scotland, Ireland, Sweden, the Netherlands have come across some of these eerie bog bodies, and some of them are incredibly old. The oldest found to date being the Kaldberg Man in Denmark, dated to 8000 BCE. Some of the remains are just skeletons now, but there are a surprising amount that are so well preserved you can actually see their facial features, hair, and even their clothes. There's a bit of a mystery about these corpses as well. It's not entirely clear why some bodies would have been buried this way. Some researchers think they were victims of sacrifices or rituals, or they met their end through some ancient form of justice. Up next on the list, we have the unluckiest man. Just look at this poor sap. This is the remains of a man who clearly met a very unfortunate end during the volcanic disaster in Pompeii. You could say everyone in Pompeii was incredibly unlucky, but this guy, whole other level. I mean, as horrific as this must have been, that image of the skeleton crushed under the rock, just with the feet sticking out, it's almost so awful. Kind of goes all the way around to being funny. I don't know, there's something comedically cartoony about it. It's very Bugs Bunny. When this guy was first discovered though, scientists thought the eruption of Mount Vesuvius had hurled a boulder into the air, crushing him as he attempted to flee. Pretty awful, but it would have been pretty quick, right? I mean, you get crushed by a boulder, you pretty much die instantly, especially if it's your head. Their initial assumption was wrong though. Scientists removed the boulder only to discover that the guy's skull was still completely intact, so it didn't crush his body like they initially thought. He would have likely died of asphyxiation, which I think would have been a much worse way to go. It would have been a lot slower. So yeah, poor guy. Roopkund Lake. Back in 1942, a forest ranger discovered hundreds of human skeletons at the bottom of this glacial lake. Not just a few, we're talking about a whole bunch of bones. So how did these poor souls end up there? Some say it was a group of pilgrims caught in a sudden and violent hailstorm. Others think it was an army that got caught in the crossfire of some ancient battle, and the bodies were dumped in the lake. Then there's the folklore. Locals have about a legendary goddess, Nanda Devi, getting angry and unleashing her wrath on those who dared to trespass her sacred territory. Recent studies have actually revealed that there's not just one event that led to the skeletons at the bottom of the lake though. Different groups of people met their mysterious fate at different times. In 2003, a team from National Geographic retrieved several bones from the lake and discovered that there were actually still small amounts of flesh attached to some of them. I think this lake is just cursed. I'd stay far away from it. Alright, if I ever find myself in Italy, which I really hope I do one day, I gotta add this place to my list of destinations. Capuchin Crypt in Sicily. This is a burial site, but instead of your typical graveyard where all the bodies are stored underground and out of view, this place has them right out in the open. Rows upon rows of skeletons and mummies, all still wearing the clothing of their time, line the walls, and tourists can walk through the place and look at them. Located beneath the Capuchin Monastery in Palermo, the catacombs have been in use since the 16th century. They were first intended for the burial of Capuchin friars, but over time, many of the local elite wanted to be stored there and started paying to have their remains kept in the crypt when they died. The catacombs are divided into various sections. One of these sections is the Rosalia Lombardo Chapel, named after a 2-year-old girl whose body is remarkably well preserved, eerily so. The bodies are arranged along the walls or displayed in open coffins. It's certainly eerie, but pretty fascinating, especially seeing them still wearing the clothing that would have been common when they died. Just makes you remember that these were real individuals with their own stories, families, and lives, rather than, a tombstone with a name and a bunch of bones 6 feet underground out of view. Next on the list, we have the discovery of a mass grave containing the remains of 54 Viking men. So in 2009, archaeologists in Dorset were excavating land where a new road was going to be constructed, the Weymouth Relief Road. While this excavation was taking place, they stumbled on this shallow mass grave containing the remains of 54 men who they later realized had been Vikings. They were all decapitated. The bodies had been haphazardly tossed into the grave, and the heads had been placed in a pile off to the side. They'd likely attempted a raid on an Anglo-Saxon territory and were unsuccessful, being rounded up and meeting their grisly ends at the hand of a sword. But it was clear that these hadn't been quick, merciless deaths. There were multiple wounds on the men, aside from, their heads having been detached from their shoulders. One skull even had a large hole at the top, meaning it had likely been lobbed off, exposing the man's brain before he died. And one guy even had his fingers sliced off. He likely tried to grab the sword as it was coming down. Pretty awesome. Anyway, seemed like a really fun time to be alive back then, doesn't it? Alright, we've talked about Vikings, mummies, and an unlucky man. Now let's move on to vampires, or at least people who were believed to have been vampires. These folks were pretty unlucky too. Vampire burials have been discovered in various parts of the world. These were basically any burial aimed at preventing the dead from returning from the dead as vampires or revenants. There are of course tons of different beliefs throughout many different cultures, but one reason someone could have come back as a supposed vampire was if they suffered a particularly cruel death or were believed to be out of their minds when they were alive, for example. The point is, there were all kinds of methods used in order to prevent them from returning from the grave. In some cases, corpses were buried with bricks or stones placed in their mouths. This was believed to prevent the deceased from rising and feasting on the blood of the living. The idea was that the brick or stone would inhibit the vampire's ability to bite and feed, because they just wouldn't be able to just take it out for whatever reason. Pretty pathetic attempt there to stop a vampire. Another method involved placing a sickle or another sharp object across the throat or waist of the deceased in the grave. This one's pretty obvious. It's a trap! The corpse wakes up, goes to get up, and oops, there goes its head. It's a much better plan, I think. In some cultures, bodies were buried with heavy stones placed on top of them. Again, pretty simple idea behind that one. And some burials involve just physically securing the coffin to prevent the supposed vampire from escaping. Nails or other fasteners were used to seal the coffin. Next, we have the recent discovery of plastic rocks. So scientists studying Brazil's Trindade Island, a very important nesting site for green turtles, have made a pretty alarming discovery. Many of the rocks on the island are now intertwined with melted plastic, forming a new type of rock called plastiglomeratus. Kinda messed up, really shows the extent of human influence on our planet. Fernanda Avalar Santos, a geologist from the Federal University of Paraná, and her team conducted chemical tests to identify the types of plastics that were in these rocks. The primary source of pollution they found is fishing nets, which are common debris in Trindade Island beaches. These nets, which are dragged by marine currents and accumulate on the beach, melt and blend with the natural materials of the beach when temperatures rise. Trindade Island is a crucial conservation spot for green turtles, attracting thousands each year for egg laying. The island is mostly uninhabited, with only members of the Brazilian Navy present, maintaining a base and protecting the nesting turtles. The plastic-infused rocks were discovered in a protected area near the turtle nesting grounds. Santos said that this finding is pretty unsettling. The plastic pollution, mismanagement of waste, and garbage in the oceans are now becoming intertwined with geological material. That is really bizarre. Crazy. Next on the list, we have the Necromancer's Cave. How awesome does that sound? How can I not put that on the list? Necromancer's Cave? In 2009, archaeologists exploring Toimim Cave in Jerusalem made a really cool discovery. Deep in the cave, they found human skulls, oil lamps, and bronze daggers. It doesn't take an archaeologist to piece together that there were some rituals going on here, but these rituals were more specifically related to necromancy, the art of communicating communicating with the dead, and that I would not have been able to guess. The exact findings included 120 oil lamps dating back to the late 2nd to 4th centuries CE. The lamps were intentionally placed in hidden, hard-to-reach crevices, which seemed to imply they weren't just used to light up the cave. Along with the lamps were weapons like daggers and axe heads, and 3 human skulls. No other human bones were found. Ancient papyrus scrolls from the same era detailed spells and customs honoring the cave. These included instructions on restraining and sealing the mouths of skulls and raising spirits with skulls. The researchers put together that these spells actually aligned with the artifacts found in the cave. At the time, the cave was thought to be a portal to the underworld. The oil lamps, including the 120 that were discovered, were believed to lure spirits to the realm of the living. Alright, ever wanted to know what a mummy sounds like? Well, we're getting pretty close. Just back in 2020, researchers set out to replicate the voice of Egyptian priest Nesimon, who's been housed in the Leeds City Museum since 1823. So how did they recreate the voice of a man who's been dead for 3,000 years? Well, they digitally recreated all his mouth parts and then 3D printed it. That's my simple way of explaining it. Then they used one of those electro links voice box things, what I want to talk through like this, and then fed it through the 3D printed mouth, and you get this. Kind of sounds exactly what I picture a mummy sounding like, to be honest. Like, you know? And finally, we have evidence of people being fed to vicious animals. It's not like that's unheard of in history, in the history of our species, but finding physical evidence of this is pretty fascinating. In recent digs in Teotihuacan, the ancient Mesoamerican city in Mexico, archaeologists stumbled upon something pretty wild. Among a bunch of unearthed remains of predatory animals, mostly big cats, were also human bones, which has a pretty dark implication. People were fed to these animals. Now, what were these animals being kept for? Likely for sacrificial rituals. So they kept the animals alive for a time by tossing in some very unlucky human beings their way. The question is, were they dead already, or were they fed to the animals while they were still alive, possibly as a form of punishment?
Number 10. Newbury Airplane Boneyard. In Newbury, Ohio, resident Walter Saplata hosted a collection of military aircrafts from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Though often called an airplane graveyard, Walter would have preferred the term sanctuary, as he was saving the aircrafts from being turned into scrap metal. The sanctuary featured approximately 20 stray aircrafts that Walter collected from his scrapyard job in Cleveland, junking thousands of warplane engines that were declared surplus, according to his son Wally Saplata in a November 2007 issue of Air and Space magazine. Walter used to open his property to the public, but in recent years, the aircraft boneyard has been kept private. He passed away in November 2010, and today it is unclear what remains of the aircraft graveyard. Number 9. Geauga Lake Amusement Park. What was once the world's largest theme park is now an overgrown land of decaying roller coasters, empty concession stands, and abandoned ticket booths. In 1925, the park cemented its place in amusement park history when the Big Dipper roller coaster was built. At the time, it was the largest roller coaster ever built, but soon tragedy struck. Following all of its success, the park experienced some setbacks. In 1942, the park was hit by a tornado, 6 people were injured, and the park experienced a lot of structural damages, around $50,000. Further tragedy struck in 1952 when a massive fire engulfed parts of the park, destroying many key features of the park, including the famous dance hall, the theater, the roller rink, and the bowling alley, amounting to $500,000 in damages. From 2000 to 2004, the park was expanded and became Six Flags Ohio. From 2004 to 2007, it became known as Geauga Lake again under the ownership of Cedar Fair. But on September 21st, 2007, Cedar Fair announced that the park would not be reopening, and it has been abandoned ever since. Number 8. Cincinnati's abandoned subway. In the 20th century, Cincinnati decided to build a subway system after canals quickly became even more of a nuisance than they had been when they were bringing in trade. The plan was made in 1912 to build a 16-mile rapid transit rail system in a loop around the city, with a branch undergoing and heading downtown. More than 80% of the people of Cincinnati said yes to the new railway, but work on it didn't start until after World War I on January 28, 1920. Despite several delays, the 2-mile underground portion of the subway was completed in 1923. Proposals came and went in the 30s, but none were implemented. A 1948 study finally ended the Cincinnati subway for good, though efforts to do something with the tunnels have been constantly ongoing for more than half a century. Ideas have included a bomb shelter, a shopping and nightlife district, a massive wine cellar, and more rapid transit. The latest proposal is for another subway. I-75 was built, destroying a large segment of the underground passage, but one of the city's best-kept secrets is the fact that sections of the original subway still remain, including all 4 of the stations put in during initial construction. Today, all these passages are sealed off, and they are used by Cincinnati Waterworks only. Most of the entrances have been gated or concreted over. Now, access is both illegal and extremely difficult, and no people, this is not a challenge. Number 7. Chippewa Lake Park. Tucked away in the Medina County, there's a rusted, lost, forgotten Ferris wheel. What was once Chippewa Lake Park is now just a few piles of amusement park ruins and the lone Ferris wheel. From 1878 to 1978, the amusement park was a popular, thriving destination for family entertainment. It closed after the final owner, Continental Business Enterprises, closed it due to lack of attendance. After the park's closure, its rise and structures were left largely untouched and unmaintained for over 40 years. Today, remnants of it creepily stand abandoned, rusted, and long forgotten. And fun fact, in 2008, a cast and crew from Los Angeles filmed the horror film Closed for the Season there. Number 6. Kerr's Run Colored School. This schoolhouse for Black American children is one of the oldest remaining in southeastern Ohio. Currently, it's boarded up and overgrown with brush. The school educated children from the 1st to 8th grade, including James Edwin Campbell and James McHenry Jones, 1st and 3rd presidents of what is now West Virginia State University. The school remained in operation from the late 1880s through the early 1900s, and in 2007, a historical marker was added to the school site. The sign briefly documents the history and legacy of the school. Now, the school is right beside an old church, and you can visit outside, but you shouldn't try to enter either building as they are in unsafe condition. Number 5. Franklin Castle. Rumors about the eerie castle began to surface after multiple deaths occurred in the Tideman family while living in the mansion. Hans the father allegedly tore down another house on the property where 4 of his children had died. His first wife Louisa died inside Franklin Castle in the 1890s, and he would eventually bury 3 more of his children and his mother. Since then, the location has been the site of mysterious hauntings. A family with 6 children called the Romanos had moved into the house, and on the day they moved in, 2 of their children said they'd encountered a crying girl in white on the 3rd floor. But when Miss Romano investigated, no one was there. Soon, the family started hearing haunting organ music and heavy footsteps. 2 of the older Romano children woke up one night to find something yanking blankets off their bed, and Miss Romano once awoke to find herself screaming on her bedroom floor with an unseen presence screaming beside her. A priest advised the Romanos to move out, and in 1974 they did, but the hauntings didn't stop when they left. From there, the house was sold again and again and again. Each new occupant reported strange occurrences like passing through odd vapors, hearing a child crying, or seeing a woman in black standing in the window. Unfortunately, this house is privately owned, so you cannot go and explore all the spookiness, but there is a lot of rich history here. Number 4. Warner and Swayze Observatory. The Taylor Road Observatory was gifted to the Case School of Applied Science in 1919 by the Warner and Swayze Telescope Company. The original building was a domed tower construction with a powerful telescope that took advantage of the relatively undeveloped Cleveland sky that was at the time, much more free of light pollution. The site continued to develop in the decades, growing with more buildings and facilities, but unfortunately by 1950, the growth of the nearby city was shining too much ambient light into the night sky, and the telescope had to be moved to a new location in Arizona. The Taylor Road facility continued to conduct astronomical research in the 1970s, but the site was completely abandoned in 1982. Vines and decay accumulated on the walls as time and neglect took their toll on the observatory. However, it was finally repurchased in 2005 by real estate mogul Nair Al-Mahid, who planned on returning the site into a luxury home. Unfortunately, his renovation didn't happen because in 2007 he was convicted of fraud and sent directly to jail. Today, the observatory continues to stand off Taylor Road, and it's best not to trespass and enter the building though because the area is unsafe. Number 3. The Peters Cartridge Company. The Peters Cartridge Company was once an integral part of the local munitions production industry, but now the factory factory is abandoned. Built in the 1860s, the large building complex was established to support the Peters Cartridge Company. The factory began producing shot and cannonballs for the Union Army during the Civil War, and then continued to produce American munitions into the 1950s. The factory had a lot of accidents though. In 1890, several train cars loaded with gunpowder collided and exploded, ending the lives of 20 factory workers. There were a number of fires and machinery accidents as well, leaving employees maimed and physically disabled. Before the factory finally closed, the site was repurposed to press vinyl for Columbia Records, but eventually nothing was made of the tall brick buildings. As the factory buildings are extremely decayed, local police supervise the Peters Cartridge Company closely. Urban exploration is not advised, as floorboards are rotten and elevator shafts are empty in the buildings. Number 2. Helltown. Yep, you heard that right. Why anyone would want to go to Helltown with a name like that, I have no clue. Founded in 1806, Boston Village, aka Helltown's claim to fame was that it was standing as the oldest village in Summit County. Boston's relatively uneventful life took for a turn for the worst in 1974 when the National Park Service decided that Boston Township would be the new home for a new national park and began buying the properties of its longtime residents. The empty homes were boarded up and adorned with US no trespassing signs. But then the government quickly fell behind on its plan to create the park and the village sat neglected. The hellish aura of the area only continued to grow when rangers visiting the site became ill and covered in rashes. It was soon discovered the dump was highly polluted with toxic chemicals improperly disposed of. Also in the village there is a church which is said to have been built by Satanists, complete with upside down crosses. There's an abandoned bus that is said to be host to a lingering ghost, and maybe the most outlandish of all, there is talk of mutants who were created by the chemical spill, including a monstrous snake known as the Peninsula Python. And coming in at number 1, Lima Tuberculosis Hospital. The Lima Tuberculosis Hospital was a tuberculosis sanatorium built in 1911 to deal with the leading causes of death in the United States in the early 20th century. Opening in 1911, it held 24 beds originally and was remodeled in 1927 to hold 158 beds. The capacity changed to 138 patients after an additional remodel occurred in 1957. The hospital was then renamed Ottawa Valley Tuberculosis Hospital in 1960, and by 1970 it was nearly empty. In 1972, the use of the second floor was shuttered and the entire hospital closed its doors in 1973. While the hospital was winding down operation on January 10, 1972, it was agreed that the hospital would be transferred to the Allen County Board of Commissioners. Because of its relatively remote location and the use of hard-to-clean-up substances such as asbestos in the construction of the original 1911 building, the city of Lima did not prioritize demolition of the building. It's rumored to be haunted as well, and around Halloween of 2020, a large surge of trespassing at the site occurred, which led to an increased police presence and crackdown on trespassers. So don't even think of trying to visit. Coming in at number 10 is Bali Hotel. Graphic designer Paulina Achalute went viral on TikTok in 2022 after exploring a completely abandoned hotel in Bali. In a series of TikToks that have racked up almost 30 million views in total, Paulina and her partner explored the empty resort with 266 rooms left in near perfect condition. The video begins with a before and after shot showing just how eerie the site is. Paulina has not been able to find any history on the hotel, but believes it was suddenly abandoned around 2020 and no one seems to know why. She said the last reviews of the hotel guests were written in 2020, so I guess it became abandoned throughout that year. The place was completely open, there were no signs of closure, no fence, or anything like that. If anything, at the beginning we thought it was a functioning hotel, as we noticed 2 helmets placed on the ground by its reception, so we thought someone is still in the hotel. Now the footage shows different areas of the venue, including the entrance, which has been taken over by nature, as well as various rooms, dining spaces, and trinkets that Paulina discovered. Now some rooms are still made up for guests who will never arrive, with furniture, towels, leaflets, and toilet paper in place. Later, Paulina and her partner even found plates with half-eaten food on the table, as well as documents in the staff room. Now this is truly haunting, it's like everyone just magically disappeared. Number 9. Pripyat Amusement Park. The Pripyat Amusement Park is an abandoned amusement park located in Pripyat, Ukraine. It was to have its grand opening on May 1st, 1986, in time for the May Day celebrations, but these plans were cancelled on April 26th when the Chernobyl disaster occurred only a few kilometers away. Several sources report that the park was open for a short time on April 27th to locals, but they were forced to evacuate as reports of dangerously high levels of radiation in the area started to emerge, something inhabitants and authorities were unaware of the day of the nuclear incident. Now, radiation levels around the park vary. The liquidators washed radiation into the soil after the helicopters carrying radioactive materials used the grounds as a landing strip, so concreted areas are less radioactive. Today, the park remains untouched and the unused rides are disintegrating or consumed with mold. Many explorers go to this abandoned place to see what could have been. Number 8. Lennox Castle. Lennox Castle in Scotland was built in 1812 for John Lennox Casside Lennox. He was supposedly a distant relative of the Clan Cansyd, who were descendants of some of the most notable ancient earls of Lennox. The castle was home to the important Scottish family until it was converted into an asylum for the mentally ill in the 1930s and a hospital during World War II, when the existing mentally ill patients were transferred to other buildings on the property. Apparently, fights among the patients were common, and in one particularly bad fight, much of the staff, along with uninvolved patients, ran from the hospital. The rioters were locked inside, and in the end, they significantly damaged the ward. Now, the hospital was vacated by the 1980s and officially closed in 2002. There's now talk of converting the building into flats, but for now, it lies abandoned, decaying, as there was a fire there in 2008. Number 7. Linwood Hall. Linwood Hall is a neoclassical revival mansion in Elkins Park, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. It's the 12th largest historic house in the US, and it features a whopping 110 rooms, like a ballroom that can accommodate 1,000 guests. It once held the most important private art collection of European masterpieces in the country. It was built in the 1900s for Peter Errol Brown Winneter, a businessman who became wealthy from investing in public transit and meat packing, among other things. Now, he had 3 sons, one of whom died on the Titanic, and he lived in the house until he died in 1915. His son Joseph inherited the mansion and lived there until he died in 1943, and no surviving members of the family, even his children, wanted to take on the responsibility of the place. By 1945, his estate was valued at $98,368,058. A developer later tried to sell Linwood, but the only taker was a fundamentalist preacher, Carl McIntyre, who bought the home in 1952 for $192,000. Now, it went into foreclosure in 2006 when the McIntyre organization couldn't pay the mortgage, and it lies abandoned to this day. Now, I can't imagine exploring this place as it is huge. There are still tables and chairs set up, as well as furniture, and the inside of the pool lays filled with debris. Number 6. Lai Family Mansion. Built in 1929, the Meigong Ghost House, aka the Lai Family Mansion, is a freaky place with a heartbreaking history. Located in the Taiwanese countryside, it's been abandoned since the 1950s when the family fled abruptly. Now, there's plenty of stories for why the family left, but the main story is that the family's maid was having an affair with her employer, Lai Rongyu, and when the secret became public, she died after jumping down a well. A few years later, the property was occupied by members of the Kuomintang of China, KMT, many of whom were also thought to have died by ending their own lives, which exacerbated its reputation as haunted. Today, it sits untouched with nature and strange paintings overtaking the outside of the building. Number 5. Villa de Vecchi. Villa de Vecchi is located near Camp Como, Italy. The House of Witches dates back to 1854 to 1857, when it was built as a summer house for Count Felix de Vici. The family was only able to spend a few years there as they had tragedy after tragedy right after it was built. First, the architect died a year after construction. Then in 1862, Count de Vici came home to discover his wife dead and his daughter missing. When he could not find her after a year of searching, he died by ending his own life. His brother then moved into the home, and his family continued to live there until World War II. Now, it has been vacant since the 1960s, and an avalanche in 2002 wiped out all the houses in the area except this one. Now, you'd think with all the tragedies surrounding the house that it would succumb to the avalanche, but no. Let me just say, that is so freaky. Now the inside of the house today is covered in dust and most notably has graffiti all over the walls. Number 4. Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane. The Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane is a listed building on the U.S. National Register of Historical Places, and it first opened its doors in about 1869. The campus was divided between a women's side and a men's side with a violent end and non-violent end. Administration buildings sat in the middle, and the land had originally been designated for agricultural purposes, so the hospital ran its own farm with crops grown and tended by the patients. Now patients were unconfined, able to walk about as they pleased, but there were entire buildings devoted to treatments like electroshock therapy and ice baths, as well as operating theaters and a morgue. A cemetery on the grounds features markers with numbers, no names for the thousands buried there. Now after Geraldo Rivera's 1972 expose on the deplorable conditions at Willowbrook Asylum, numbers in large institutions declined sharply. Willard Asylum discharged its final patient in 1995 and shuttered its doors for good. The building is currently rotting and decayed, housing the secrets of what the patients went through. Number 3. Ridges Asylum. Ridges Asylum originally opened in 1874 and was known as the Athens Asylum for the Insane. It had 2 wings, one for the female patients and one for the male patients. Now the most violent patients were housed at the outermost tip of each wing. By the start of the 1900s, the asylum had become dangerously overcrowded, and rumors of inhumane treatment at the hands of the overworked staff were growing. Despite this, it was not officially closed until 1993. Now some parts of the building are still in use, while other areas are completely abandoned. Now one of the scariest places in the building is the outline of a body where Margaret Shrilling died in 1979. She apparently got lost in the disused part of the hospital in the winter of 1978-79 and was not found for more than a month. When the corpse was finally removed, it left a stain that could never be washed away. It's still there today, and if you go there, you can see it, which is just haunting. Margaret is one of the many ghosts who is said to walk the asylum at night. Strange figures have been seen roaming around old floors, and others have heard disembodied voices, footsteps, and screaming. It's a scary and disgusting place, and I would never set foot in there. Number 2. El Hotel de Salto. In San Antonio del Tequendama, Colombia, a 1920s residential mansion was constructed overlooking the falls. For 60 years it operated as a hotel, and it was built in 1923 as a luxury hotel to host elite travelers visiting the area. Ordered and built by the President of Colombia and designed by architect Carlos Arturo Tapes, the hotel was a place for the richest to gather and indulge in most exceptional experiences. Now it was meant to be renovated in the 1950s, but due to pollution of the Bogota River, the project was dismissed. In the 1970s, sewage started affecting the river, so the hotel closed in the early 1990s as a result of the overwhelming pollution in the river. Now some reports state that it's the second most polluted river worldwide, as the river is full of feces, waste, chemicals, and many other toxic things. Over the years, the hotel began to deteriorate until it was left deserted altogether. Today, the hotel is said to be haunted, and this is owing to the fact that many people have used its location as a place to end their life. It's also said that Muisca Indians used to jump into the falls to evade capture from Spanish conquerors. The myth is that those who jumped would turn into eagles and soar to freedom, and sadly this appeared to most wanderers, who would then leap to their death. This place is just full of tragedy. And coming in at number 1 is the Diplomat Hotel. The Dominican Hill Retreat House was built in 1913 atop a hill in the famed Philippine city of Pines. With the outbreak of World War II, it became a camp for refugees escaping the Japanese army, but it was eventually invaded. It was once occupied by refugees, nuns, and soldiers, but it was bombed by the American Armed Forces. People were taken advantage of and mistreated, tormented, and had their heads cut off. In the 1970s, the Wharton building was converted to the sophisticated and beautiful Diplomat Hotel, but the hotel was shut down by the 80s and left abandoned. The deserted, deteriorating building became infamous for being one of the most haunted ruins in the country. Currently, the old hotel is now under rehabilitation by the national government as a heritage and nature park. Now, many people have seen headless apparitions at night and reported hearing screams, cries, banging on doors, and other strange and desperate noises.
St. Elmo, originally known as Forest City, was once a very popular mining town in Colorado. They had about 2,000 people living there when the mines opened. However, in the early 1920s, the mining industry started to decline, and slowly people packed up and left. However, it's not completely abandoned. Apparently, a couple of people still live there, but it's said that this place is haunted. In fact, it's said that it is home to some of the most paranormal activity in the state. Maybe it's a good spot for paranormal investigators, but not the best area to live in. I mean, I wouldn't want ghosts for neighbors. I mean, maybe I would, if they were friendly ghosts that kept noise levels down, then sure. Moving on at number 9, we have Krakow, Italy. Krakow, Italy was founded in the 8th century. However, it now lays abandoned due to a series of destructive natural disasters. The first natural disaster occurred in 1963 when a bunch of landslides affected the area. This was a result of the city being built on a cliff 1,300 feet off of the ground, and they also had some sewer and water system issues. Then in 1972, a flood struck the area and made the whole situation worse. Then in 1980, there was an earthquake that left the city completely abandoned. Now, the only people you may catch there are film crews. It's a very popular filming location. Some scenes in the film Quantum of Solace were shot there. But the area itself is considered a ticking time bomb, and it's surrounded by a locked gate. Making our way down the list at number 8, we have the city underwater. You aren't going to be able to visit this next city unless you have access to scuba diving gear, because this city is now completely submerged underwater. Built 1,300 years ago, the city I'm referring to is Chang, also referred to as Lion City, and it's located in eastern China. In 1959, the city was purposely flooded to build a hydroelectric power station. Now it's referred to as China's Atlantis. What's pretty fascinating is that although it lays about 40 meters underwater, the buildings are still in pretty good shape. The only change is instead of having human residents, it's home to tons of aquatic life. Moving on to number 7, we have Cahaba, Alabama. Cahaba in Alabama was abandoned after suffering from seasonal flooding. In 1865, Cahaba was destroyed by a flood and then abandoned. After the flood, living there became relatively impossible, so residents had no choice but to leave. But then in the 1920s, an archaeologist started to uncover and preserve some of the structures. Now it's said that the area is very haunted. In fact, it's known for a ghostly orb that can be seen floating around only to vanish into thin air. So the citizens may no longer live there, but ghosts certainly do. In our 6th spot, we have Varosha, Cyprus. In the early 70s, Varosha was one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. That was until 1974 when Turkey invaded Cyprus. As a result, the residents there fled for their lives. Some residents have told stories of pots being left on their stoves or things still left in their ovens. It's quite sad how they were forced out of their own home and not allowed to return. Since 1974, Varosha has been abandoned and under control of the Turkish military. The whole area is now fenced off and under constant supervision. If you try to break in, well, the army patrols have orders to shoot on sight. So don't even try to visit the city, it definitely will end badly. It's just such a shame because the area is beautiful. In fact, actress Elizabeth Taylor loved going there. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Plymouth, Montserrat. Plymouth, once the capital of Montserrat in the Caribbean, is often referred to as Pompeii of the Caribbean. Why? Well, in 1996, a volcano erupted, causing a mass evacuation. A few months later, some residents returned, but were welcomed with another eruption. On June 25th, 1997, this eruption killed 19 residents and destroyed the island's airport, trapping many others from fleeing. Eventually, Plymouth was evacuated again, but this time, no one dared to return. Everything was destroyed. In fact, 80% of the town is currently covered in ash. Pictures show homes completely buried with only their roofs sticking out. It's quite sad and scary. Moving on to number 4, we have Centralia. Centralia is an abandoned town located in Pennsylvania. It was once a populated town, however, a lot of residents were forced to leave due to unsafe living conditions. This all started after a coal fire ignited underground. This fire has been burning for almost 50 years. and it's predicted to continue on for another 200 years. As a result of this fire, tons of sinkholes have formed, hot smoke is released underground, and carbon monoxide has filled some residents' basements. In some parts of the town, it's said that the ground beneath them have reached up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 400 degrees Celsius for us Canadians. Now, the US government is trying to erase any history of this city. They took away any signs directing people to this town, removed the town's zip code, and forced most of the residents out, except for 7 residents that are happy living in their deadly town and refuse to move out. In our third spot, we have the Island of Dolls, aka the island I never want to visit. Located in Mexico City, the Island of Dolls is full of dolls hanging from trees and buildings. If that's not bad enough, these dolls have been there for so long that they are covered in dirt, cobwebs, and insects, making them look that much more terrifying. Now, you're probably wondering how this place came to be. Clearly, it's not Annabelle or Chucky's private island resort, though it could be. So back in the 1950s, a man named Don Julian started to hang dolls from trees as a way to protect himself against evil spirits. Paranormal things kept happening to him there, so he would hang dolls everywhere with the idea that they would scare the souls of the deceased. He spent more than 50 years hanging dolls. Some were found in the garbage, some were missing limbs. Did not matter. If it was a doll, it got hung up all around the island. Now it's abandoned and looks like something straight out of a horror movie. Coming in at number 2, we have Wittenoom, Australia. Located north-northeast of Perth, Australia, Wittenoom is considered one of Australia's deadliest towns. And you would think it would have to do with Australia's massive and deadly insects, but surprisingly not. In fact, it's because of its blue asbestos. In 1937, blue asbestos was discovered in the city's gorge. Years later, miners were unearthing tons of asbestos from the ground. It wasn't until 1978 that the government started pushing people out of their homes. They realized how deadly it was for them to be living there. It was increasing their risk for cancer. And in some cases, people were already developing lung cancer just from living there. It would cost the town about $2.43 million to rid the town of asbestos. So instead of doing that, they just shut the town down completely. In 2006, the government turned off the power to the town and had its name removed from maps and road signs. In fact, all roads that once led to the town are now closed off. If you do choose to enter the town, you will find tons of huge warning signs advising you to turn back. And in our number 1 spot, we have Pripyat, Ukraine. This is probably the most famous abandoned city on the list. So Pripyat was a city in Ukraine that had a population of 49,000 individuals. However, on April 27, 1986, all residents were forced to evacuate following the Chernobyl disaster. Pripyat was the most affected by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster since they were the closest to the power plant. They were the ones most exposed to the radioactive chemicals. A once beautiful city was left abandoned in just 3 hours. Due to the radiation, the city will be left untouched for thousands of more years until it's safe enough to return.
One look at Villa de Vecchi in Italy, and it's really no surprise that it has such a dark past. I mean, it just looks like it fits the bill. Of course, being abandoned and derelict never helps matters, but still, the place looks pretty haunted. It's now become known as one of the most haunted spots in Italy, often referred to as the House of Witches. It was built in 1857 as a summer home for a man named Felix de Vecchi and his family, who suffered a lot of tragedy in the years following. Things were kind of foreboding from the start when the architect died during the construction of the building, but the real horror began in 1862. The story goes that Felix de Vecchi came home to find his wife killed and his daughter missing. The famous occultist Aleister Crowley is said to have also practiced rituals on the property. The place has been totally vacant for decades, but strange stuff still goes on, like the avalanche in 2002 that leveled everything in the area except the House of Witches, which was left completely untouched. Next on the list is the Lucy House in Uniontown, Alabama. Now, many homes in Uniontown stand totally abandoned. Environmental issues have driven a huge portion of the population out, but the Lucy House isn't just another abandoned home being overtaken by nature. No, this one is home to a very dark case. In 1994, the remains of a boy named Alan Lucy were found buried under the front porch, putting an end to a decade-old mystery. Alan Lucy lived in the home with his adoptive parents, Philip and Margaret Lucy. In May of 1985, he went missing though. A search was launched, but there were no signs of him anywhere. But then a creepy story started to spread around town. The couple's biological son, Jason, began telling classmates at school that he'd seen his father burying Alan after having killed him. Now, for some reason, his story was never taken seriously until the home had been sold and renovations were underway, and the skeletal remains of Alan Lucy were finally found. Philip Lucy was then put behind bars. The Liu family mansion, aka the Mingxiang Ghost House in Taiwan, has been abandoned for over 70 years, and it's known as one of the most haunted spots in the country. The Liu family packed up and left, and it's always been a bit of a mystery as to why. There are plenty of rumors and urban legends though, of course. One story goes that the maid was having an affair with the husband, Liu Rongyu, and when the wife found out, she made the maid's life a living hell until she couldn't handle it anymore, jumping down a well. But she wasn't gone for good. On a nightly basis, the tormented spirit of the maid would return to the home, terrorizing the family until they finally decided it was time to pack up and leave. Some say her ghost still haunts the abandoned property to this day. Another tale tells of Japanese soldiers who were holding up at the abandoned mansion during World War II. While the soldiers slept, one was keeping guard, but things turned to complete chaos when he caught a glimpse of this shadowy figure lurking around the property and opened fire. The other soldiers then woke up and in a panic started shooting too, but in the darkness and confusion they all died, having accidentally fired at each other. Next up, we have the Los Feliz house, which sat abandoned in LA's Los Feliz neighborhood for a long time. It was only just recently sold in 2020. 2475 Glendower Place is pretty infamous for a very disturbing incident on December 6th, 1959. Dr. Harold Perelson and his family lived at the home. Dr. Perelson was pretty successful, obviously. I mean, he owned a mini mansion, but at some point his mental state began to deteriorate, and the nail in the coffin was when he was screwed out of the rights to a new syringe he'd invented, having invested a ton of money in it as well. This is seemingly what threw him over the edge, and on that night in December, he snapped, killing his wife in her sleep with a hammer. Then he moved on to his eldest daughter's room. As soon as he struck her with the hammer though, she let out a scream and began pleading for her life as her father told her to lay still and keep quiet. The other siblings woke up though, all running out in the hallway to find out what was going on. Miraculously, they all managed to escape. Neighbors had heard the commotion and phoned the police, but by the time authorities arrived at the home, a copy of Dante's The Divine Comedy was left open on his nightstand, with the opening passage of the page reading, "Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward path had been lost." Next on the list is Lennox Castle in Scotland, which has sat abandoned for years. It's in total disrepair and has been in especially bad shape after a fire in 2008. The place looks like your quintessential haunted castle, but double whammy, it was also a former mental hospital. It was originally built in 1841 for John Lennox Kincaid, who had ties to a notable Scottish clan. But in 1927, the land was purchased by the Glasgow Corporation, and the castle underwent a big transformation, being repurposed as a hospital for the mentally ill. Then in World War II, it was converted into a hospital for soldiers, and the mentally ill patients were transported to other buildings on the property. Life inside Lennox Castle was far from peaceful. Fights between patients were common. In one incident, a riot broke out, causing chaos and significant damage to one of the wards. Things got so out of hand that a lot of the staff, along with uninvolved patients, fled the hospital, leaving the rioters locked inside. By the 80s, the hospital had become completely outdated, and it finally closed in 2002, and it's been vacant ever since. There are tons of abandoned mansions on what is often referred to as Billionaires Row in London, but one of them has a particularly dark history. One of these mansions, Kingsdean, was used by one of the creepiest cults in history, the Children of God. now called the Family International. If you feel like getting a good night's sleep tonight, this is a cult you're gonna probably want to avoid hearing about. The group was founded in the late 60s by dirtbag David Berg, who later became known as Moses David. The group mixed evangelical Christianity with free love ideology, regardless of age. Female members were encouraged to use intimacy in order to recruit new followers. It was highly exploitative, especially of course when it came to young people who had been born and raised within the cult. Over the years, as more survivors came forward with their stories, authorities began to investigate the COG. Leadership has changed, but the fact that this group is still around in any form is just unbelievable. The house in New Jersey where this next awful tragedy took place burnt down in the 70s, but the property is still said to have a lingering dark energy about it, and it's not hard to see why. This case is pretty grim, and the new home is pretty much identical to the old one. So in 1971, a man named John List killed his wife, his mother, and 2 offspring, all in the home. Then he left the house, went to his son's soccer game as if nothing had happened, and then killed him too once they returned home. Then he brought all the bodies into the ballroom, lined them up, cut his own face out of a family photo, and left the scene. Authorities later arrived at the home to find the bodies. All the lights were also on and the radio was blaring, tuned into a Christian radio station. John List wasn't caught until 1989. He'd fled to Denver and taken on a whole new identity. He'd even met a woman there who he'd married in 1985. The Winchester Mansion in San Jose, California is not only said to be one of the most haunted mansions in the United States, but one of the strangest. And not just one of the strangest mansions in America, but the entire world. This place is absolutely bonkers. And that's all because of Sarah Winchester, who is the wife of William Wirt Winchester of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. When Mr. Winchester died in 1881, the widowed Sarah became a little unhinged, to say the least. She began to believe that the people who'd died at the hands of her husband's Winchester rifles were now haunting her. So she started hiring workers to come in and build all these add-ons to the home, very few of which made any sense at all. The purpose? To disorient and confuse the ghosts that were apparently after her. The Winchester was always under construction. Maze-like hallways and staircases were built, leading nowhere. Doors were built for no apparent reason, and it just went on and on. The place is one big confusing nightmare, like an AI algorithm just took over with the design, not actually understanding the purpose of a home. That's a place I kind of want to check out, to be honest. Elda Castle in New York looks like a witch's house from an old fairy tale, not on the inside though. Graffiti covers the walls, as the place has been abandoned for decades. There's been a rumor floating around for years that Elda Castle is cursed. The castle was the brainchild of David T. Abercrombie, the dude who helped kickstart Abercrombie and Fitch. He and his wife, Lucy Abbott Kate, were like, let's build a huge mansion. So they did, in the roaring 20s. But then, just as the paint dried and the mansion was all set, tragedy hit. First, their daughter Lucy died in an accident at her dad's factory. Then, Mr. Abercrombie himself died of rheumatic fever right there in the house. So Lucy Abbott Kate moved away with her oldest daughter. After Lucy Sr. split though, Elda fell into disrepair. Over the years, a bunch of different people have tried to fix the place up, hoping to bring it back to its former glory, but each time they've been hit with rough patches themselves. Maybe this is a place that's just better off left alone. And finally, we have the Mudhouse Mansion in Lancaster, Ohio. This is just one of the many spooky spots in the great state of Ohio. An old, creepy house with a history full of equally eerie tales and urban legends. It was originally built back in the mid-1800s, a fancy home for a rich family, but as years passed, the mansion started to fall apart. Eventually, it was abandoned and left to rot. And over time, though, people began to tell stories about the mansion. One of the creepiest stories is that the family who lived there met a tragic end inside the mansion. Some versions of the legend say they were killed by someone. Others claim they went crazy after an evil entity attached itself to the house and tormented them. There's even a tale that Bloody Mary herself was born here. In 2015, the mansion was torn down, but that hasn't stopped all the stories. Some folks say they still see ghostly figures wandering around the area where the mansion used to stand.
Starting off this countdown we have Pablo Escobar. It was a very smart decision for Christian de Boudoir and his wife to purchase Pablo Escobar's old abandoned mansion. Legend goes that Escobar would hide tons of money all over the place, so chances are there's money stashed away somewhere in the walls. And in 2016 they made a pretty miraculous discovery while excavating the property. They found a safe hidden beneath the entrance of the house. The safe was about 2 feet by 2 feet and weighed about 600 to 700 pounds. But sadly, its contents were never revealed. But because it was hidden on the property, chances are it contains a boatload of money. Moving on down at number 9, we have the vintage house. Urban explorer and photographer that goes by the name Freaktography has found some amazing discoveries over the years. Most of the stuff he finds are very old and dirty and damaged, but in rare cases he comes across some very interesting finds. In this case, he was exploring an abandoned suburban home from the 70s. Inside, it was filled with vintage gems, like vintage collectibles like old Barbie dolls, Polaroid cameras, and a bunch of figurines like Yoda, E.T., and a Star Wars figurine set. Those things must be worth a lot by now. Moving on to number 8, we have the farmhouse. So back in 2017, Reddit user Evil English decided to explore his grandparents' old abandoned house in Tennessee. While doing so, he noticed a block of concrete in the floor by the staircase. The concrete had a round cap on it, and when he pried it off, he noticed it was a safe. Yeah, a secret safe that was built into the wooden floors. The family then hired a locksmith to open the safe, and inside was a collection of valuable items. He found coins, silver bars, cash, and antiques, all worth thousands of dollars. Coming in at number 7, we have the money in the walls. In 2007, antiques dealer Jeff Beetleman was asked to scope out an abandoned house by the late daughter's owner. She had always heard stories of treasure being buried in the walls, and she wanted to see if it was true. Plus, it was an abandoned house, so she had no problem with tearing a few walls down. And turns out that this legend was true. They found a bunch of old coins from 1826 to 1964, worth $200,000. Turns out that her relatives would use a slit in the wall as like a giant piggy bank. In our 6th spot, we have the cellar. When you're exploring an abandoned house, especially the attic or cellar, chances are you're more likely to find a dead body stashed away there than anything worth money. But that wasn't the case for some workers in France. Workers were demolishing an old abandoned house when they came across exactly 600 gold coins in a container in the cellar. The coins were from Belgium and dated back to the 1870s. They featured the king from back then, King Leopold II's face on them. It said that these coins are worth about 100,000 euros, which is about 118,000 American dollars. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the movie posters. Back in 2007, a man named Blair Peter moved into a home in Alberta, Canada, and began renovating it. The house was originally built in the early 1900s and it needed some work. But while lifting up some floorboards, he found tons of old original movie posters. He continued on renovating the house and found more movie posters stuffed in the crawl space and under the roof of the house. So it's thought that they were used as insulation, and obviously it wasn't worth money back then. But now, cha-ching. He found more than 360 posters. Apparently the man that owned the house was the owner of a local movie theater. So some of these posters were the ones hung up in the lobby of the theater. It was thought that Peter could get around $50,000 for some of the posters. That's one plus of buying an older house. There's a chance it's filled with hidden treasures just like this. In our 4th spot, we have the time capsule house. Again, another abandoned house where the urban explorer Freaktography struck gold. So story goes that he had driven by this abandoned house a number of times, but had no clue it was actually abandoned. That was until one day he noticed the windows were boarded up. A month later, the door was open. Time for him to enter. When he went inside, it was like he entered a time capsule. The house was filled with vintage items. He found old board games, antiques, and artifacts. Items that would be worth thousands. But as he always claims, he never moves anything from the house. He just photographs them and then leaves. He takes nothing but photos and leaves nothing but footprints. That's his motto. If he did take these items though, that dude would be rich by now. Coming in at number 3, we have the Mayan artifacts. Imagine being a junk removal specialist. Like, that's an actual job. You get paid to come in and clean up other people's crap. It doesn't sound that rewarding, but in this one case, it definitely was. In 2009, a team of junk removal specialists were called into an abandoned Soho apartment to clear things up. But inside, they found a bunch of valuable artifacts, including an ancient Mayan artifact, ancient figurines, and some valuable bowls and jugs. Altogether, these items are said to be worth around $19,000. Yikes. And to think that almost ended up in the landfill. Coming in at number 2, we have Superman. In 2013, a contractor was tearing down some walls in an abandoned house that he planned to renovate and then move into with his 4 children. While doing so, he found that the walls were stuffed with newspapers for insulation. But among the newspaper was a 1938 comic book showcasing the debut of Superman. It said that it was a virgin copy. That's like actually what they call it, but okay, sorry. It said that it was a virgin copy. Despite it being in not the best condition, the comic still sold at auction for $175,000. He actually would have gotten more from it, but in an argument with his relatives, the back of the cover got ripped, which decreased its value by $75,000. But still, that's one lucky man. And in our number 1 spot, we have the rolls of cash. I swear, Urban Explorer Freaktography has the best of luck. So he was out exploring an abandoned home near where he lived. He said that the house was abandoned for almost 30 years. While in the house setting up to take some photos, he noticed something odd sticking out from behind the mattress. It was a tin, and inside were bundles of tightly rolled up American and Canadian money. He said there was about $6,800 there. Now, he could have just made off with the money, but instead, he did the right thing. He tracked down the original owners and returned the money back to them. They had no clue the money was even stashed there, but they were incredibly grateful. And that's all for today's video. Let's move on to our comment shoutout portion. I'll be shouting out comments from my video, Top 10 Scary Abandoned Mansion Discoveries Part 3. Wes Gunton commented, show of hands. Who is here for the comment shoutout hoping for a shoutout? I am. I really hope she picks me. I'm a huge fan. I'm just kidding, but I'm really flattered. Here's your comment shoutout. Hannah Grace commented, Lindsay, if you had to choose between being trapped in a room with a ton of snakes or tons of spiders, which would you pick? Oh, that's a really hard one. I want to say snakes just because they're bigger and I can like keep an eye on them. With spiders, they could like be on me and I would like not even see them crawling up my arm. You know, I feel like I'd constantly be like this. But with snakes, I could like be in the corner and just like chill. And I hope they're not poisonous snakes, because then they're fine if they're just like gardener snakes. I'm fine with that. Lord_Shank13 commented, turn the camera around. I want to see the producers and staff. I don't know who you think's behind here, but it's only producer Chris. There's not like a whole team of people like holding a mic and like having the script making sure I got it right. And that's all the comments I'm shouting out for today's video. Make sure to comment something down below for a chance to be featured in my next comment shout out. And as always, don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to Most Amazing Top 10 for more amazing videos. I've been your host, Lindsay Ivan, and I'll see you when I see you. Yikes. And I'll be shouting out comments for my video, Top 10 Scary Abandoned Mansion. But no, and Chris, you know what I was thinking? I was like, you know how funny it would be if like somehow we could turn the camera around and it just be like me holding the camera and then me on the teleprompter? That'd be so funny, but no, that'd be a lot of work. Yeah, just me being like, oh hey, holding the mic, me with the camera, oh hey.
Discover America's most haunted cities. Haunted American cities that you might be living in. Check out the video now to find out more. You'll be sure to thank us later when you find out you live in the most haunted city in America.